Oh, I am live. Hey, we
Yeah, I was
are
saying you're
live.
like,
No, we are live. Well, I thought you were still yelling about smoke detectors. Do you have your smoke situation under control?
yeah, there's no smoke. It just wants to be heard.
Well, I get that. I'm the same way sometimes. I just need to make some noise so somebody hears me. You know,
Yeah,
I get that. I understand. I understand smoke detector. I get
relatable.
you. Very relatable.
At least somebody does.
Yeah. All right. So, hey, for anyone tuning in or who will, is watching this live, welcome to another Yeti Live. And I'm your host, Jimmy Gasparo, and I am here with a fellow comic book Yeti contributor,
Hi.
Alycia Al Davidson.
Yes, it is me.
So,
I
is your
am.
official title the I guess I've been calling you the manga and web comics editor.
Yeah, I think it's according to Matt. It is the web comics and manga editor and boys love expert. That is my full title.
Okay, you took that from Wells. All right, I understand.
Somebody had to.
Yeah, he was a mess, really. So, all right. I mean, it's a lengthy title, but I think
It is.
fitting. In terms of what you do for Comic Book Yeti, which is a lot, especially in terms of like the manga reviews and the boys love reviews, which always do incredibly well. Folks love your reviews, and um, so that aspect of it is great. But we're not here to talk about manga. I mean, we can, but
I can
you
do all day.
what?
I can talk about manga all day.
Yeah,
So don't get me started.
and I don't know a lot, but I'm happy to listen. But we're here to talk about you have a current Kickstarter right now
Mhm.
for a project, a novella that has a fantastic title. First off, right off the bat, When the Rain Begins to Burn.
Yes.
Absolutely phenomenal. I don't know what that is. Um, but it instantly drums up like ecological horror, which I
Mhm.
think is what exactly it is we're talking about. So I um love the title right off the bat. Chris Sheehan did the cover work,
Yes.
which is also excellent. Folks can head to the campaign to check it out. I think I'll try and share the screen. I have the campaign up in a second, but I wanted you to kind of talk about this project because fascinating. And I know a few people who have had a chance to read it, like another comic book Yeti contributor, Luke Henderson. They really liked it. We're talking highly about it. So why don't you tell the folks what exactly are they going to get with When the Rain Begins to Burn?
Yeah, well, Luke told me that when they were reading it, a certain part of the story actually caused them to drop their phone. It was so shocking, and I was like, "That's what I want. Like, that's exactly what I want." Because I love eco horror. I'm a plant lady, as you can see, and the back of everything I own is I love plants, and so that whole revenge of Mother Nature thing is a big element that I enjoy writing about, and so it's just one of those things that RVs are scary. And so I was like, what could you do if you set an entire story in an RV? And so all but I want to say a chapter and a half of the whole novella takes place in the confines of the RV. So it's very claustrophobic and very tight, and it's just the two characters. That's all there is. So it's a lot of back and forth dynamics between the two of them. So it's just a very uh, again claustrophobic environment and horror story that leans into the feelings of isolation and being separated from community and not knowing what's going on in the world and things like that. So it's stuff that, is very real that people can, relate to. Especially now in today's day and age, but it's also one of those that it's very tangible kind of situation that someday you could step outside and the rain just decides to melt your skin off. So
Yeah. All right. Well, it just recently rained here, and that's a bit terrifying to think
yeah,
like that can happen when you go outside. But I mean, you're taking these very extreme type of settings in terms of you're going on a vacation, you're in an RV, then you end up trapped in it, and really dealing with isolation and not just those like skin melting horror elements, but it sounds like it's really delving into um the kind of relationship drama as well, like taking a heightened situation to kind of really bring out what's going on between these two people, your two main characters who are supposed to be on a nice, enjoyable trip and find themselves like trapped together and trapped in, a literal nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's one of those things that, like, for me, my favorite genre of horror is apartment horror. I love that isolated, you are trapped in something that's supposed to feel comfortable and safe. And the first time I ever stepped foot into an RV, my family and I were on a trip and we were watching Alien. That was the first encounter I had with the movie Alien, was in an
Oh yeah,
RV at night. And so I'm like, oh well, RVs
right.
and spaceships are kind of similar to that apartment. You have that tight setting thing. And I was like, I wonder how I could spin that into a horror story. And next thing I know, this happened. So
Yeah, well, I mean, Alien's another perfect example of like
mhm,
a contained system.
yeah,
We don't have the whole country to run around or the whole city or whatever it might be. Like you're trapped on the ship with something that you've never seen
mhm.
before. Very, isolating, very claustrophobic. Um, what do you think first drew you to horror in terms of like watching those stories and in terms of wanting then, to take the next step and tell them?
It was funny because up until I was in probably like my late teens, I hated horror. I refused to watch any of it. And
Really?
yeah, I could not even watch, like, I mean, when I was a kid, these like live action Scooby Doo movies were too much for me. Like I could not handle any sort of
Okay.
horror. And then you deal with real life death and tragedy unexpectedly, and you have this whole dynamic shift in your life that all of a sudden you're just kind of like, oh, well, these things aren't as scary as the real world is. And my parents and I loved to sit down. It was a family event every Wednesday night. We'd always sit down and watch Ghost Hunters. That was the extent of my ghost horror type of stuff, and I always loved
Okay.
that sort of stuff. And then we, as like next thing I was like, oh, well, let's watch The Conjuring. That's similar, has a similar vibe. And then it just opened up the world of Alien and Evil Dead and those things like that. And I'm like, wow, I was missing out on this incredible genre, and it just felt very natural to start writing that kind of speculative fiction. So like drawing on those uncomfortable feelings.
Right. I mean, do you find it? I mean, I know some writers talk about a certain catharsis with writing certain things, but does horror do that for you in any sense, or is it more about kind of exploring the relationships of these characters?
A little bit of both. I think it's one of those that I like telling stories that are focused on, the human condition and relationships and humanity. And watching how those things get heightened in horror scenarios is always a fascinating thing because you're being pushed to so many different limits, and it has so many different impacts and effects that can have on different types of people. And so for me, it is that cathartic kind of thing. It's just like I can have a proxy that I can just like put all of my emotions into, but it's also fun to experiment with, how people will react if you throw them in an RV. Or I have one that I'm working on right now that they're on a research outpost on a moon, and it's literally just one of them, and things start happening. And so that sort of stuff of like being able to focus on that character side of it is a really, fascinating thing for me to be
Mhm.
able to do. It's a good character study, the psychology of it.
Right. Well, and why don't you tell the listeners and anyone watching about your two main characters, because I thought you kind of really in terms of your descriptions, and I'm always interested when folks like go out to describe their characters and the things that they think are important
Mhm.
about the characters that they are writing about. So we sound like we have a fairly nice couple with some issues, but one of the things in particular was your one character I think is like the diabetic, and
Mhm.
I thought that was very like an interesting thing to highlight, and I'm sure that comes I would imagine that comes into play in the story, and I just wanted if you could talk to about your two main characters.
Yeah, so Noland, who is kind of the central character of the story, is a type 1 diabetic. And I've been a type 1 diabetic for, oh gosh, how old am I now? I was diagnosed right after I turned 3. So it's been a pretty much a lifelong type of thing. Like I'm hooked up
Hmm.
to an insulin pump. I've known nothing else. And when you sit down and think about like diabetics in stories, especially in like horror, I can name one scenario. You have one character in The Walking Dead who was on for like 2 episodes, and her whole character arc was, we need to find insulin. And it's like there's so much more to that. There's so much more
Sure.
to it.
Yeah.
And so being able to again kind of put that into the scenario of like, okay, um, we're in an RV, we have a limited amount of supplies. How do we handle this sort of thing as a diabetic who lived through COVID and not being able to go and having to make sure I had insulin and the things that I needed? It was a very like interesting way to kind of like add that into the story and make it a very natural piece of his character. And then
Right.
of course have Judah, who is his husband, kind of come in, who is the big strong, teddy bear protector that is like worried about the whole situation and overprotective, that only gets heightened as the situation grows worse, because Nolan's like, yeah, this is what we can do, and Judah's like, no, but we have to do something, and it kind of continues to amplify the problems that they have that they are not acknowledging in their relationship.
And with like a story like this, and putting together the novella, and I understand like for the Kickstarter, it's all finished, it's all like
Mhm.
ready to go, so that's great. So once you hit your goal, which it looks like you're doing pretty good so far,
Yeah.
so hopefully you'll hit the goal, and everyone will get the story. How long do you work on something like this in terms of your process as a writer, when like inspiration strikes and you're like, oh, I could do something with this. I could do something in an RV. I want to tell a story about these characters. How long does it take for you to kind of like develop a story like this?
So far, my track record of all four of the novellas that I've written have only taken about a month and a half to write. And that's the nice thing is because they can only be so many words, to otherwise you're hitting novel territory. And so usually it just kind of like comes like I'll be running an errand or I'll be taking a walk and I'll just have an idea and then I'll just go and sit down and I'll just write until I, fall asleep, kind of thing. And this one I started writing at the tail end of last year and it got done kind of in Marchish, but it has gone through several like edits and changes, and the original ending ended up getting, you know, deleted because I was
Yeah,
like,
I
this is
wanted to
not
talk to you about that.
I was like, it's too much. Like I was even talking to Luke as I was like writing the story, and Luke was like, that's too much. And I was like, oh, maybe it is a bit too much. And so ended up having to change the whole ending, but I still was like, oh, I really kind of like that darker ending. And so I ended up writing that one too. So now I have two different versions of the book. And the other version has actually like 30 extra pages to it worth of like story changes. So
Right.
it was an interesting process to kind of like wrestle with the like, I love these characters too much to do this to them, but I also really want to do this to them. Kind of
Yeah, so
thing.
you're calling it what, the Sunshine, the
Yeah,
Sunshine
it's the
Edition
Sunshine Edition.
is like I'm assuming like the really like a much bleaker ending. I don't know if you want to, if that's correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
It is
Well,
the darker, bleaker version of the story. It's the ironically titled Sunshine ending.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting, it's like you hear like kill your darlings or different
Mhm.
things that writers say, or you know, others have said about writing and what you put your characters through. But it really depends on like what it is you want to go for and what you're trying to tell. But it I think it's interesting in terms of getting that feedback and being able to like to pivot and still tell the story you want to tell slightly differently, but then being able, with something like Kickstarter, to include that
Right.
and be like, here guys, it could have been this.
Right. Because it's like there's no way I can afford to publish both of these versions. I might as well do something with it.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the, I guess, the good things about Kickstarter and being able to kind of offer that as like a PDF as like
Yeah.
another reward for the story. Um so when you said you started towards the tail end of last year and you kind of finished it up about March. Are you somebody that like outlines in advance? Are you just like start writing, do that kind of like vomit draft, get down as much as you can, and then start the editing and revision process?
It's literally a like mad writing session. I will literally just sit down and be like, oh, this is an idea, and just go. It's very rarely, I will usually come up with some sort of like vague concept, and then usually I know how I want it to end, and then it's just getting to the rest of it that takes
Right.
a long time. But it's very rarely do I have a full plan in place, because I have learned that if I do, I will never hit it. So I might as well just write and see what happens, because characters can change and evolve as you're kind of like getting to know them and developing them and things like that. So it's one of those that I try not to plan too much, because it things can change, and then you're like, well, now I have a whole notebook worth of notes that I can't use. So
Right. When you're someone that you said you've done 4 of these, and I know just from Comic Book Yeti and the things um, we've talked about there that you work on a lot of different types of stories that you want to write and you want to get out there. What is it that causes you to like settle on an idea? Is there anything in particular you're like, oh, I had this idea for this character, I had an idea for this story? Like, what really pulls you to wanting to find the one story that you do want to work on amongst some of your other ideas?
I think that's probably the reason that I am so tired, is that I don't pick. I just do all of them.
Okay.
That's why I end up with a folder that has 50 short stories, and now I have 10 novellas that did not exist. Like, I started my very first novella in, I want to say July of last year, and now I have 10 of them in the drafts,
Oh
and
my
4 of them
gosh.
are done. And so I just don't know how to just say no to myself. I'm like, oh yeah, then we can figure out something how to do this, or oh yeah, this short story could turn itself into a novella. Let's try it and see what happens. So
Wow.
yeah,
Um,
there's
so
no picking.
there's
I love
no,
all
you
the
just
children equally.
you work on all of them. Do you set aside time for writing, like in terms of, your job and work and side jobs, whatever it is you do? Do you have like dedicated hours to write, or are you just like not precious about it, fit it in when you can?
I don't do anything other than work and write. It's one of those. I think I looked at my like screen time, and for what it says that I spend in the Pages app alone, I spend on average 26 to 32 hours a week just typing.
Ow.
It's
Wow.
which is it's a lot between doing things for Comic Book Yeti,
Yeah.
between the novellas and like of everything else that I do in the Pages app alone. I spend close to that per week on average. It's funny because everyone's like, I hit my nano, because my national writer novel month is 50,000 words, and I'm like, I have averaged that every single month since March of 2020. Like, that's a normal amount of writing for me, is 50 to like
That does not
55,000
seem like
words.
that. Sorry to cut you off. That does not seem like a normal amount of writing.
It's a
That seems like
lot.
a lot of writing.
It's a lot. I do nothing but sit at my computer, and which is why I have arthritis and have to go to the acupuncturist to get needles put in my arms. It's because I can't feel my hands.
Oh, Al, what are we gonna do with you?
So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. But I play a lot of video games, and I do read a lot of manga and stuff. So it's usually, I take some time to, like, I have
Right.
15 minutes set aside every day to play Animal Crossing, and I try to read a couple of comics. And I the first thing I do when I roll out of bed in the morning is read my webcomic updates. That's how I start my morning. As I start my morning with my brand new BL releases, and then I do whatever I'm going to do with the rest of the day. So I do other things, but it's not a lot of other things.
Okay. And for anyone who doesn't know, BL releases is boys love, which I've learned through Comic Book Yeti. Um, so I wanted to ask you in terms of manga, because, and I've said this before, I have like a manga sized hole in terms of my like comic reading. Manga, web comics, just was never anything that I was kind of like aware of.
Yeah.
I don't have any particular aversion. I've told you before, and I've said it on like the podcast. My 10-year-old has totally gotten into manga. Started off a little bit, then finally watched every season on TV of My Hero Academia, and then went to read it, and is now, I think, watching a show called Black Clover.
I love
And
Black Clover.
okay, so like she's like all in on Black Clover now. She's going through that. And then I sent you a picture of some of like the manga that
Yeah.
she's reading. One was like a soccer one, and one is I don't want to mispronounce it, but I just can't remember what the most recent title is that she's like really into. That we're now she's scouring the manga section at the Brandywine 100 library in Wilmington, which is actually it was just great. So she's like very excited. She's doing pretty good making it through everything. But I wanted to ask you in terms of, that's kind of what you do in terms of what you review, what you edit. And so what was your introduction to that? Kind of how did you get into it? What is it that you like about manga, whether it's not the stories that are being told or the format? What does it for you that's kind of what you're interested in?
Funny enough, I got introduced to it from my mother, we were homeschooled. If you couldn't tell about the everything about me, we were very homeschooled. And so it was when we were doing our homework in the morning, and in the afternoon, like Toonami was on, and so we were watching Dragon Ball Z and Gundam Wing and Sailor Moon while doing homework. And my mother would like she loved it. My mother was the biggest nerd. Like she loved X-Men. Her favorite character was Sabretooth. Like she would like fangirl over the movies. And we went to Borders when back in the olden days when Borders was still a thing.
Hey,
And
I worked at Borders once.
I miss Borders, but she picked me up a volume of Card Captors for my 10th birthday because she's like, oh, this is a thing that's on Toonami. And after that, it was she, bless her heart. I don't know how they didn't go broke for my addiction. They started me young. Every week we would go to Borders and she would buy me a new manga. So starting at the age of 10, it was just a constant stream of new releases, and which wasn't a lot because it was back in the early 2000s when you had a very small section of things. And
Right.
so it's been one of those, like, been since since manga first started coming out. It's been something that's I've known, and it was an easier thing to get into compared to like regular comics, because I mean, even if you think about it, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were a bajillion volumes of Batman and X-Men, and no one knew where to start. And with manga, it's really easy. Like, this is volume 1, here you go.
Right.
And so it was easier for younger readers to get into. And so I just kind of like pivoted to that, even though I loved Batman growing up, but it was just easier to like find an avenue to get started there than it was in traditional comics. And so just for me, it's just like what just became my thing. So
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with that to to a certain extent in terms of like the big two and
yeah,
those comics, because like I want to read Batman. Like, where do I start? And it's like, well,
right.
whose run do you want? You want to check out Snyder and Capullo or Grant Morrison, or so there's always like that aspect to it. And Marvel Comics is the same way, because like you restart with a new writer, a new creative team, and it's a new number one, and it's like, I just want to know like what's going on,
Well,
like
how did we get here?
yeah. I mean, when I got back into comics, it was because I went to a convention and just for something to do in Philadelphia, and I was like, oh, there's like this Wizard World thing. Like, I've never been to a comic book convention or whatever, and I think there were some media celebrity like folks there that I thought would be neat. And a lot of the DC stuff was all about Blackest Night, and I was like, oh, Green Lantern, zombies, that sounds like kind of
Right.
neat. So I got Blackest Night, like 3 or 4 of the like the big book hardcover volumes. I thought they looked nice and they were pretty cool. I had to read it like with Wikipedia open because like I'm like, I don't know who is this? What is going on? I've been out of comics like so long, and I've gone back and read a bunch of stuff, and I then reread Blackest Night, and I'm like, oh, this makes more sense now.
Right.
But I certainly get that aspect of, hey, here's volume 1, and that's what I think. That's what Charlotte, my daughter, likes about it. In terms of the storytelling, was it easier for you to get into like that way as well, in terms of the type of stories that were being told, or was that really you just wanted something fun, or what was your like interest when you were really getting into it, and how have your tastes in manga changed over time?
Well, I think definitely like having things like Toonami and 4Kids, because it was like Pokemon was just coming out and Yu-Gi-Oh was just coming out. So like those bigger, and of course, you have Dragon Ball, which is still huge to this day. And so it was nice to be able to kind of do like that. Oh, I can go back and follow along with the story that I'm already seeing on the TV,
Right.
because mangas usually follow super close. Like My Hero is almost word for word the same in the manga to the anime. And so it's kind of nice. It's like, oh, you feel like you're able to like keep up with things even if you miss a volume or miss a few episodes. And so I used to read a lot of the magical girl stuff of like girls with magic powers fighting cute monsters and things like that. And now I'm reading collections of botanical body horror and things about. One of my favorites is Life Lessons with Uramichi Onisan, and he is a washed up 30-year-old athlete who now runs a children's television program and hates his life. And it's the funniest and most relatable thing as a now 31-year-old that's like, everything is so hard and so awful, and where did the joy go? I have cried reading that because it's so realistic and so funny. But it's just but I still do. Like, I have a couple of those magical girl series. I'm like, man, this is just so charming and it's so fun. And I think that's the
Right.
nice thing about manga is that, like, when I get my boxes of stuff from Yen Press, I get a horror, I get a boys love, I get a magical girl series, I get one of those isekai titles of someone getting transported to a magical world and getting turned into a vending machine. And the variety is just so insane that you can, like, no matter where you're looking, it's like something new and something different. And there are lots of people turning into vending machines. That's a new thing, and I don't understand it.
Wait, is there really a manga series where somebody turns into a vending machine? Because you know what, I want to
Yeah.
read that.
Yeah, it's great. It's literally there. So the isekai genre is a genre about normal people usually getting hit by a semi truck, and these semi truck tropes are so big that the fans have called him like Truck-kun. They've named the truck that kills these characters that transport them into these magical worlds, and
Is it all the same truck?
they all look exactly the same. So that's why
Oh,
it's like a running joke
yeah,
now.
we need to look into that.
And one of the ones that I got was this: he was a vending machine fanatic in his life. So when he came back in this magical reincarnated world, he got turned into a sentient vending machine. Like,
I love it. I love
it's
that.
it's great. They're so weird and they can do so much with it. And you can have like the most serious thing, and then you can have just something super crazy. And I think it's the variety of it and the approachability of it is just so nice that, I can give like my sister who doesn't read anything at all. I'm like, here, have this volume of this, and she's able to get into it and enjoy it. So it's a nice variety to it.
Right. Do you, uh, with having, being interested in something that might have like more of a fantastical type of element to it, like some of those things you've just talked about, do you find that like your interests have like influenced your writing in any particular way? Like even when you're writing, something like an ecological relationship horror, do you find like some of those things like creeping in there at times, like even if it's a little nod or a little touch?
Yeah, and especially with something as big as like the space opera series I'm writing. Again, that series currently has 1.3 million words in it. It's huge, and I can see the influence of like growing up watching the original Star Trek coming into that. I'm just like, the characters, and they spend a lot of time in their ship and they're talking and building relationships. And I have somehow managed to, I think, find every single form of apartment horror that exists. And so being able to like pull little things from that, and uh the elements of it that I like, to be able to kind of like from like Silent Hill The Room, which is a game that takes almost entirely, like, I want to say 50% of the game takes place in an apartment, and it's terrifying. And so being able to pull like kind of those themes and those feelings from it is great influence. And it just opens you up to a variety of things that you can like experiment with and try. And I enjoy those types of things a lot.
Well, that's so cool. Back to When the Rain Begins to Burn, I wanted to ask a couple of other things about it, because I'm always interested in the setting. And I think if I read correctly, it's set like your two main characters go on a vacation in the Appalachian Mountains.
Yes.
You know,
Yep.
I love that area as a setting. I've always have. I've never hiked it, like the Appalachian Trail. I've always wanted to. Was there any particular draw as to why you picked that? Was it like, throw a dart at a map, or you're like, no, I have a particular reason I'm setting it here that you can talk about, or do I have to read to find out?
No, well, so I used to live in Kentucky, and I used to live like very close to like that area of Kentucky that bordered everything else. It's like 15 minutes from Indiana. It's like an hour and a half from Ohio. And I had family that lived up in Washington, D.C. And so to be able to go from Kentucky to Washington, D.C., you have to drive through that area.
Right.
And I just have these vivid memories of just nothingness and just open wilderness and the rolling hills and the mountains. And stopping at a truck stop there to like a rest stop is the most terrifying thing you'll ever do when the sun starts to go down, because it's like the noises are weird and there's just nothing for miles. But it's just so beautiful. And I'm a big fan of like Colorado. I love Estes Park, and so it was one of the things I was like, oh, I could set it in Estes, but it's a little bit too populated. So what if I make that like what their end goal was? But they were like making their way, because the characters live in New York, so like they're making kind of their way, doing a tour of the mountains kind of thing, and heading down to Nashville for a music festival. And that's when they stop kind of at the border area of like West Virginia and Kentucky on their way down, and then that's when all hell kind of breaks loose. So
Okay.
it's beautiful out there, but it is very scary. There is a reason that people subscribe to Appalachia TikTok to listen to the weird things that happen. Like, that's a whole thing, and I understand exactly why they're doing it.
It is interesting because you're taking an area that's known for a lot of weird stories, whether or not weird, I mean, in terms of whether or not it's folklore or whether or not it's, hey, check out these bizarre things that have happened like in the news or on video or, other things, bizarre things that have been, set there. So you're taking an area that's already kind of known for strange happenings and also being isolated in the wilderness and adding this extra element of like confinement in terms of the RV and being like now you're not only isolated in the wilderness or where they stop, but you're also isolated just the two folks like in the RV. It's just very interesting the layers that you're creating in terms of this type of horror story. So I find that very interesting and I really like all those aspects to it.
Yeah, I love tight confined spaces in my stories. Like the smaller the spaces and the less I can get them outside, the better. Like one of the other novellas that I have takes place in two locations. It's in a funeral home and an apartment, and that's about the extent of the two locations that the entire novella takes place in. And they're both claustrophobic and creepy, and there's corridors and dark shadows, and
Right.
I work in a funeral home, and it's scary having to turn the lights off when you're the only people there at night.
Yeah,
And
I would not want to do that. So good. Kudos to you for working in the funeral home because I would have to think that already naturally lends itself to be like a creepy setting. Like you wouldn't take much, and so then when you do start to push it in that direction, I have to imagine you can really mine a lot out of that.
yeah, especially we have an indoor mausoleum at the one I work through, so we
No,
have to walk
thank you.
down
No,
the
thank you.
mausoleum.
No,
Uh-huh.
thank you.
And so I was doing
No,
a
thank you.
service. I was doing a service the other night where we had two open caskets, and so we had to go and turn the lights down. But we had to keep the red lights on for the bodies out of respect, and so you just leave a room, and it's this big empty chapel with a red light shining down on a body. And I'm like looking at this, I'm like, I could do something with this. Because it's very unsettling. There's nothing weird about it. I mean, it happens to everybody, but it's kind of like when you're in the moment, it's like this is a little intense and a little weird.
Yeah. No, I mean it does. Yeah, it happens to everybody. Everybody dies. We understand that, but still, like we don't have to face it and look at it every day. We have to at times when we're confronted with it, whether or not it's someone we love or our own mortality. Um, but yeah, and certainly depending on the individual constitution of the person, those experiences can be unsettling. I
Yeah.
mean, I have the nervous system of a squirrel, so it does not take much for me to jump or scream or be scared anymore. I say anymore. Let's be honest. I was always like this.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny is I would absolutely take being in a dark morgue in a mausoleum over being in the mountains at night by myself any day. Like the mountains are scary. there's
Yeah.
a there's a like my first thought is like Blair Witch happens out here. I don't want to
Right.
be here.
Yeah. Yeah. There are also like real world like scary things that
Yeah.
happen that but sometimes our mind the old mind plays tricks on us or concocts scenarios. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
Well,
can imagine that would be terrifying working
and
in the
and
funeral home.
and that real world aspect is kind of like the catalyst that sets the novella up is that you have Judah and Noland who are a gay married couple and they're traveling through the Appalachian wilderness, and that's the whole point of why they go off the beaten path to park for the night is because they're trying to make sure that they're not seen. And so you're adding those kind of real world elements to it that are then only heightened by the situation that happens. And the nice thing is that you can kind of allude to those sorts of things without making that the center point, but it's still felt. And that was something that I really wanted in this story was like those struggles that so many people have to go through and in the scenarios. And again, like there's a comment that Juna makes is that they were on their way down to Nashville, but with things that are happening in Tennessee, they didn't really feel like it was a good idea, so they were trying to figure out how to detour somewhere else because they didn't feel like it was safe for them. um,
Right.
and so that's trying to add that real world, like, yeah, the rain is melting the skin off of everything in the clearing, but it's almost not as scary as the other things that are happening around them kind of situation. So that was a big key element of what builds up to the tension in the story.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's it's a sad truth of like the time we're living in now
Mhm.
that whenever you think you've made some type of social progress and then it seems to be pulled back is awful.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just a sad function of I don't know right now, and hopefully, you know, there's there's more of there's more of us than them
Yeah. Well, and that's
in the long run. But yeah, you have to. It's it's tough.
yeah, and that's the cool thing about Kickstarter and self-publishing is that you can tell those stories, and the people who need to read it and want to read it will find it.
Yeah,
Because if you're trying to like take a story that has a character who is a type 1 diabetic, and I'm using terms that I know in my day-to-day life and that these characters would know in their day-to-day life, and if I'm trying to do it to your traditional publisher, they're going to be like, oh, you need to like dumb that down and explain everything. It's like, well, that wouldn't be how the conversation would be naturally. And my editor Heidi is phenomenal. She actually specializes in indie horror projects, like that's her thing, and so she understands it. And so I'm getting someone who actually understands the field and the genres and what's going on. And with Chris doing the cover art, like after I saw the cover for the autumnal, I was like, I need that in this scenario. So being able to build that team and tell the story the way that it was supposed to be told is like, because I was like, yeah, I could send this to a publisher, but I could just do it myself and make sure that it's the way that I want it to be seen, which I think is a really cool thing about crowdfunding opportunities that in self-publishing world that people don't really tend to grasp. They're always like, oh, you're not a real you're not a real author if you're doing self-publishing. And it's like, well, I'm doing more work than you are.
yeah. You're definitely a real author. There's, I mean, you're doing a ton of work, and yeah, but you're telling your story your way. Yeah, Chris Sheehan, I'm a big fan of their work. The autumnal, um, the 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 more recent double feature vault series that they
Yeah.
were working on one of those stories. Yeah, just excellent stuff. And so you also had Joe Hunter
Yes.
involved designing, I think, stickers for the campaign.
Yes. I love
Uh,
those stickers. They're so cute.
and so who else? Is there anyone else involved that has kind of like helped with the project?
Yeah, I've got Angel, who is the host of Voices from the Mausoleum, does a bunch of like horror movie and book reviews and podcasts, and Angel's awesome. And then I have Mira, who was the editor for my last campaign, Rapunzel, which is the futuristic Rapunzel story.
Right.
They did the editing for that, and so I'm bringing them in to come in and help with the bonus zine. So I kind of have two teams. I have the main novella, and then I have the bonus zine side of things, and everyone's been phenomenal to work with.
Cool.
I have a really great team of people. So
Awesome.
yeah.
I wanted to try. I just wanted to see if I can uh pull this up for a second.
That campaign that I slaved forever. Oh hey, I got another bagger.
Yeah.
It's like somebody new.
But I wanted to bring it up so that any folks watching who haven't gone over to the Kickstarter yet can see. In terms of, I just really love the cover image here, an echo horror romance novella. I mean, that's so good.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing was is I literally sent Chris an email. I was like, here's the characters, here's the synopsis, here's the aesthetic. And then I didn't get any pre-sketches. I didn't get anything. That just appeared when
Yeah.
they did that. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, that was not what I was expecting, but I love it. It's gonna look so good on a bookmark too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of these, like I was scrolling down. But yeah, I mean, that just the whole thing that the skeleton and then the RV looks amazing.
Yeah.
I think that's really great.
Yeah, and little pops of red look so great too. I'm just like, it's enough of a horror, because that's the thing, is that it is a horror, but it is also very much a romance. And so having that balance of the two of them to where it's not just like screaming like, oh, this is a slasher flick kind of situation
Right.
with just the colors and the RV and everything. I like the kind of the dichotomy between the two ends of the cover. It's beautiful. I want to print it out and put it on a poster.
Yeah, it looks really good. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. And how long does the campaign run till?
Till the 31st. So we are still in, the dawn of it. The early bird specials do end tomorrow at midnight.
Okay.
But the campaign runs all the way to the 31st, so there's still plenty of time. So,
Awesome.
which is good.
Well, Al, I wanted to talk in terms of like Comic Book Yeti because that's how that we know each other. Kind of how did you find your way to Comic Book Yeti? And when you're looking at something that you want to cover in terms of writing a review for it, what is it that you look for? Is it anything in particular? Is it just something that, strikes your fancy, so to speak, or do you have a more discerning process?
It kind of depends on what it is. I actually found Comic Book Yeti through the Pale, because I was reading the Pale at the time, and they had posted something about Comic Book Yeti needing reviewers, and I was like, oh, I could do that. And I had just moved in the middle of the pandemic, and I was like, I need something to do to like occupy my time, and then things just kind of escalated from there. But for me, it's when it comes to the web comics, it's things that I know are either going to be easily accessible. They're creators that I know personally, that I'm like, I know that you're putting the work into this, and this is something that your heart and soul goes into. Because there's a lot of them that you could be just like, oh, this is there. I mean, DC's making Batman web comics now
Yeah.
on Webtoon, and I'm like, you don't need that sort of stuff. But like the people that I know are putting in 80 hours a week creating this story. I'm like, that's something. And if I've enjoyed it enough to where I'm like backing it on Kickstarter and buying their merch and buying commissions from them, I'm like, this is something that I want to share with other people who may not know it exists. And for the manga, it's just more of just like anything that really captures my attention. Tokyo Pop and Yen Press have been great about sending advanced copies of stuff, so I try to help people stay involved and up to date on what the cool things that are coming out are. So, and there's lots. I think Yen Press had, I want to say like 40, almost 50 titles released in the month of June alone. It was a lot.
Wow.
And so it's like, how do you pick and choose what to pick up? Because they have manga, they have manhwa, which is the Korean manga. They are doing print versions of webtoons, and they have a light novel division. So they have 4 different publications under their umbrella that release things every month now. And so it's like, how do you keep up with all those sorts of things? And they're really good about saying like, these are the things that we think that people are actually really gonna like, so let's talk about these.
It seems like with everything you're interested in and what you've done so far, and I was thinking about this earlier, and then you just mentioned it. It seemed like something like a light novel would kind of be, rather than a novella, would be like right in your wheelhouse in terms of that mixture of prose and like illustration.
Yeah.
Do you ever think that's something you'd be interested in doing and moving in that direction?
I have thought about it. It's just one of those the extra steps that would go into adding those sorts of things. Like I have a few that I wanted to cover for Comic Book Yeti, and then I started reading them, and I was like, oh, I want to do this. And I'm like, I don't know if I have the mental fortitude to actually do this with my own stuff, and then find someone that I have to pay to, collaborate with to do the art for. Because like there's one novel that I'm working on that I got the title based off of a dream that I had. I was dreaming that I became famous for making a web comic called The Devil Is Here and He's Demanding the Rent. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what it is, but I love the title. And I started reading it. I sent it to Matt, and Matt loved it. And I'm like, oh, this would be really cool if I had some of those like elements of the illustrations in it. And I was like, oh, I could do Kaylin Smith. I love her. I love her art. I have her art tattooed on my body. Like, I love
big fan.
Big fan. Her cover art alone is like several $100s. And I'm like, I can't afford, I'm too broke to afford you. I was like, there's enough people dying at the funeral home for me to make enough money to be able to afford you.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, it is. I only work when people die. So
this is true.
It's like, it's a good thing that I'm not working, but at the same time, I'm not working. So the morbid side of working in the end of life service.
Yeah, I mean, it's that gallows humor. I appreciate it. I do.
But yeah, it's definitely been something that I have thought about, especially with The Devil Is Here and he's demanding the rent. I think that would be a great one because the characters are so fun. It's about a priest who accidentally gets hit by Satan's son's sports car, and they end up actually accidentally claiming his soul, and so now it's this priest living amongst everyone down in hell, trying to figure out how life works down there, and he keeps getting fired from all of his jobs. It's kind of like it has a very like webtoon kind of like aesthetic to it, and I was like, it'd be really
Okay.
cool to have illustrations in that, but it's just finding the time and someone who's willing to work on it and that sort of stuff. But hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah. One of the things that I love is like types of story. I guess I don't know if it's a genre in and of itself, but I really like when there's like a supernatural story, but elements of bureaucracy.
Hmm.
Like like I really get into that. Like, like here's heaven and here's hell, and
Yeah.
we have a system. Heads up, it's shitty, you know? Like
That comes from years and years of watching Supernatural.
yeah, that's probably part of it. And also I just kind of think I like that sense of humor to it. Like there's a grand plan and then it's like, but it's a bit of a mess
Yeah.
and there's red tape, I just really, that stuff cracks me up.
Yeah, it's that good omens aesthetic of that what Neil Gaiman and so like I love that book.
Yeah, Terry Pratchett.
And
Yeah.
Terry Pratchett and it's just it's so clever and it's so witty and it's something that like so many people can like understand and you don't need to like do a bunch of research or world building to like follow up with because it's like everyone knows heaven, hell, and angels and demons. Like that's a normal thing. And so it's a
Right.
very approachable genre. That's I've discovered when I was working at the bookstore that there is a subgenre of contemporary romance that is paranormal, like supernatural demons, heavens, and hell, but in cute contemporary rom-com. It's like a whole new subgenre of things. And I'm like, this is so weird because every cover has like a witch girl and then a demon dude in a suit on it. And there's like shelves of it. And I'm like, where does this come from? And I'm like, I'm here for it. but it's like we're moving away from the
Right.
vampire true blood side of things and moving into
Yeah.
the whatever this is.
Well, I wonder when it started. Like I wonder, is this like from Twilight or before Twilight, could that like that take on it in terms of
Yeah.
taking supernatural and have romance and then just go on from there? And like, why can't we have like wacky combinations? Like why can't we do all kinds of things? And here's a nice orc person and they're, in love with a Bigfoot and
Yeah. I saw
they
I
both
saw
have day jobs.
I saw one that I can't remember what it's called, but it's an indie book, and it's literally about a secretary who works for an ogre in a business office. As the cover is the two of them in an elevator in their business suits, and it's like a romance story about a woman and her ogre boss at the office building they work at. I'm like, I'm here for it. It's weird
Yeah.
and it's different. And I think that's what happens when you have like all the people who grew up on Supernatural and Charmed and Twilight and Harry Potter that are like, oh yeah, magical things are fun. And now we're all like, well, I guess we need to take all this years of fan fiction writing practice and put it to use with something else.
And do something with it, might as well. Yeah, I just, I mean, I watched my brother and I, shout out to the Comic Book Eddie, Cryptid Creator Corner's #1 listener, my brother Bobby. Bobby and I watched every episode of Supernatural together. We started in 2004. We're like, oh, it's a show about brothers. We're brothers. It was an excuse to hang out after we had both moved out of our parents' house and we're living in our own places. And and by like season 8, we're like, how much longer are we gonna have to do this? 7 more seasons, guys.
Yeah. I don't think anybody saw it coming either.
We did. We watched every one. But I recently did like an 8-page short comic for an anthology with artists like Joe Kovis, did the artwork and colored it. And I sent it to my brother and I'm like, oh, because I usually have him read everything that I write, like because he'll do everything from like tell me not whether it's working or typos. He's not a writer, but he reads a lot of stuff and I always appreciate his opinion. And I sent it to him and he his text back, he goes, I just finished it. And I was like, what do you think? And he's like, horny supernatural. And I was like, thank you. It's like, that's what I was going for. That's it.
That's the goal. That's the ultimate goal.
That's it.
Yeah, you're lucky. I can't send anything that I write to my family. I would be shunned. Like I would be excommunicated from.
Well, we don't want that.
No, but it was fun because I actually did get to have my family read Rapunzel, because that's more of a, family friendly, and people aren't getting melted off by the rain and things like that. And so that was a fun, have my sister help do the art for that, and I really enjoyed that little. I actually had somebody message me on the campaign page last night asking if I was going to put it on Goodreads so they could add it to their page count for the year. And I was like, I don't know how to do that.
Well, I figured out, I guess.
Cool.
Sure.
Cool. But I was like, I don't know how to do that. So I have to like sit on Goodreads for the rest of tonight. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. But
I love that there's somebody out there who's like, look, I read some stuff and I need my Goodreads count to be accurate.
I need those extra 32 pages.
Good for them. They have a goal. They have a goal in mind, and they're reading and they're marking stuff off their list. I love it.
It's good. It's fun. I'm super excited to write the follow-up for that one whenever I have a second to actually do that between every other deadline I have.
Well, it's good to be busy, right?
Yeah. I just wish they didn't all pile up on the same set of like crunched in same months. I have a manuscript due by the 7th, and I have another one due in the middle of August, and another one due in October.
Wow. So. The crunch time deadline is tough, Yeah,
especially when it's so hot. I'm just like, I just want to like not do anything and sit with a hot laptop in my lap and try to think. But it's fun. I enjoy it. It's what I do. It's what I spend all my time doing. I've canceled so many plans to be like, no, I'm gonna stay home and write tonight. So like my family doesn't invite me out for anything anymore. It's like, you're probably working on something. It's like, yeah, you're right.
Do you think at some point you'll find, are you happy with that? Or do you think at some point you're like, at some point I know I need to find a better balance? Or are you like, no, this is good. This is what I enjoy doing. I'm happy doing it.
I've been doing this since March of 2020, and I am still coming up with new ideas. I have not hit burnout. I took my laptop with me when I went to Disney World last year for my birthday vacation so I could continue to write in my hotel room in Disney World. And so it's like, I don't really, I'm one of those people that are like, everyone's like, how do you deal with burnout as a writer? And I'm like, I don't know how I haven't hit it in 3.5 years, but I haven't.
Yeah.
I'm just going to kind of keep that momentum until I either damage my hands beyond repair or do finally hit that moment of like, okay, I think I'm done. So
you didn't take the laptop on any of the rides, did you? Were you like sitting on like the Jungle Cruise, like
no.
tippity typing?
No, with the weights I had, I probably could have, but because I had to wait 57 minutes to get in the Haunted Mansion and then got stuck. So I was like, I could have gotten so much done.
The Haunted Mansion is still like my favorite thing to go on there.
It's so fun. It's so fun. It's a great ride. I'm excited about the new movie. That's my. I'm like, yeah, I need a new Haunted Mansion movie.
Yeah. I'm excited about it too. Looks like a great cast.
I know. I'm so excited about it. I don't think I've been to the movies. I've been to the movies much since the pandemic started. I used to go almost every Tuesday because we had one of those little $5 theaters that it was.
That's great.
It was phenomenal because it was like still a relatively new-ish theater, and it was any showing you wanted. So it was new releases, matinees, IMAXs, any time of day, so long as it was on Tuesday, flat $5.
Nice.
And I only worked half days on Tuesday, so every time I get off, I'd go and see whatever new thing was out in the theater, and I did that for like 2 years. And now I've seen maybe 5 movies since the pandemic started, and it's like, oh, movies are a thing that I haven't seen in like. I think the last one I watched was in November.
Yeah, like you mean like actually at a theater?
The last movie I saw at a theater was Bob's Burgers in May of last year.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, it's one of those that I have a few that I'm like, yeah, I want to see the Barbie movie. That looks like a hot mess and a half. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I want to see that too.
And the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, I'm a huge Five Nights at Freddy's fan. That's like my dream. Like if I could have one person to interview for Comic Book Yeti, it would be Scott Cawthon for the Five Nights at Freddy's comics, because I have so much I want to pick his brain about why he decided to do what he did. So I'm a huge Five Nights at Freddy's fan. But yeah, it's most of it is I spend most of my time writing. I have YouTube up in the corner and I just sit and type away until either the sun comes up or I get too tired to focus anymore. So
What do you have on when you're writing? Like you say YouTube. What are you watching, listening to? What's in the background?
usually it's someone playing video games because like it's a nice way that's inexpensive for me to experience the video games that I don't have the time to play or afford. So I like to have like them on and watch them play. Or I have a few drawing channels that they'll sit there and do like drawings and sketches and things and challenges and things like that, and
Oh, okay.
DIY channels and things like that. But it's mostly men screaming at video games very loudly, nonstop. Like, just,
See, to me, that does not seem like a conducive writing environment.
no, it's just I'm just so used to it because I think my average watch time for YouTube, if I look at the app, it's about 117 hours a week. Like I sleep with them screaming at video games on. So like for me, that's just a normal background noise kind of thing like that. So
Wow. See, like my Dario Argento, like Suspiria nightmare is somebody, taping my eyes open and making me watch Matt play Final Fantasy like for hours on end. Like I'm donezo. I'm like, tell Al somebody's coming to the funeral home because I'm just, my brain's gonna melt having to deal with that.
yeah, I just think it's nice too because it's like it's funny because my cat has started to notice which ones that I listen to the most. And so I had to take her with me on a trip one year, and she was just screaming bloody murder in the car. And I started playing a playlist of like that channel's videos, and she stopped screaming because she recognizes them. Like that's how much of like I just have on to have that background noise and the false sense of other people in the room, I guess. But
Your cat's like, oh, purring, everything's fine.
yeah, she loves it.
The men are yelling at Elden Quest or Dragon Ring or whatever the kids play. I had to say something that make me sound like a really old man. At least one thing, although I'm sure I said several. Well, Al, this has been fantastic.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on for another Yeti Live with another comic book Yeti contributor.
It's exciting when you get to collaborate with people that you work with and not just send messages on a Discord.
Right, or gifts.
Right.
But yes, so for everyone, if you're seeing this live when we're doing it on July 2nd, or if you're watching it later, if you found it on the Comic Book Yeti Twitter page or on YouTube, or if you're still on Facebook, I think we're broadcasting on the Comic Book Yeti Facebook too. It's Al Davidson is here with me, and their Kickstarter is When the Rain Begins to Burn. You can get it all of July. You can back the campaign. It is a fantastic ecological horror romance novella, and Al does fantastic work, and I am very excited. I can't wait to read it, and then I can't wait to have a couple drinks and then read the Sunshine edition.
Yeah, I had to step away after I got done writing. I'm like, this is a lot.
All right. Well, Al, good luck, and I'll see you on the Discord. And I promise, unlike this, I won't say anything nice to you.
That I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, I know.
I would.
People listening, they're very mean to me. Al is very mean to me.
Someone has to be. Might as well be me.
All right, Al, good night and good luck. And
thank you.
Thanks for talking with me about When the Rain Begins to Burn. I'm very excited for the project. I'm very excited to read it, and I wish you the best. This has been phenomenal. We should do this more often.
Yeah, I agree. I think people would probably sit and watch the Comic Book Yeti editors just sit and talk. I think that would go over really well.
I don't know. Matt's like super boring. Have you like talked to him?
I've had lunch with him twice. Yes, he's so boring.
I feel bad for you. That's
why we're there. He just exists and we talk around him.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
I wish he would. I wish he would watch these. He doesn't. I don't think he does. I don't think he does at all. I could say whatever I wanted. I don't think he does. Well, everyone, thank you for watching and listening to us. Al is fantastic. They're a fantastic writer. They're a fantastic reviewer. Make sure if you're into manga, web comics, if you're not, Al can point you in the right direction for something that I'm sure you're going to be interested in. But please check out When the Rain Begins to Burn. And yeah, thanks everybody. Good night.
Night.
Good night, man.